future does not fit in the containers of the past. This is Rashad Tabakawala, and he is the head of emerging opportunities and partnerships for Vivaki, which is an arm of the advertising giant Publicis. And I met him at the University of Oregon and really took a liking to him, especially his ideas on the future of marketing, because that was part of my course, like looking at how marketing is going to be affected and using a digital strategy piece to get the students up to speed on what exactly is modern marketing. You know, you can't just stick things out on the web, etc. And my favorite is his insight. One of my favorite insights of his was that although we all embrace technology, I would deny many people to say we don't embrace technology. Almost everyone has some sort of mobile device on them, whether it be a phone or a laptop or an iPad type device. We don't reorganize our ideas in new ways that would result in actually incentivizing new behaviors that we all know are very important. We don't use that. We use these devices ourselves, but we don't kind of spend time. Perhaps musicians would be an example of, if you apply it to musicians and bands and artists, in other words, if an artist embraces the technology that they invite into their lives, why then would they not apply the very same technological opportunities to their creative business models? That's what I mean by cognitive dissonance. You can't wander around like everyone else using iPhones and Android devices and listening to music. And believe me, I know almost all of my professional music friends listen to Spotify. So there's this weird cognitive dissonance, because then they'll turn around and say Spotify is evil. And you can't have it both ways. You can't have the cake and eat it, in other words. And so why don't they apply those technological opportunities to their creative business models? What is it? And I can't even answer my own question, because I don't know why they do that. And if you think about it, how many people out there like me as a professional musician are talking about these issues and trying to change the rhetoric and get people to actually debate it? They prefer not to debate it. They prefer just to kind of snipe from the undergrowth, as it were. And it all ends up then being blog posts from various musicians just ragging on the internet and the technology. It's become a whipping post, but it only ends up on their own sort of website. It's in public, as it were, but the debate is not in public. You have to track down these websites and then go track down a response to it, which is, I find, not a good way to be doing this. And so, my point is, if a musician doesn't apply the technological opportunities to their own creative business models, then musicians that do, who tend to be young musicians who are not, haven't signed contracts and are not bound up by the old ways of doing things, they embrace the technology and run circles around them. And there's some young musicians I know making plenty of money and doing extremely well by embracing the internet. And the other thing is, you can't just speak in tech talk phrases, because that won't get the job done. You actually have to really embed yourself in it. And another thing that Rashad brought to the table, I thought, was when he was looking at the modern marketing issues, there was another parallel that he was looking at in a marketing way. I was looking again at the issues for musicians that I think are real, not imagined ones. It sort of stands out as a triumvirate. The real issues for musicians currently are globalization, digital itself, and new markets. And I feel that analogy holds. Globalization is particularly interesting to me because in the West we've kind of saturated the take-up of internet access. So in America, arguably, I think it's about 82% now of all Americans are online or are able to be online one way or the other. And it really means the ones that aren't are very old people who don't want to be, or they're 6-month-old babies that haven't got around to getting their first iPad yet. It's packed, it's full, we're done. Put the sign up, no room tonight. But if you look abroad to Asia, where there are 1 billion people, and something like only 200, like a quarter of them, 250 million are currently online. That's, they're accessing online through their mobile devices. You can see why Apple and Samsung are battling it out over there, trying to win over, sell their device to win over more of these people. And it's the margin for opportunity there is massive. And when I was talking to some managers in London early last week, one of them had said that he's been setting up music festivals in India, and it's been going extremely well, which is quite interesting because the music festival scene for me, especially in America this year, there's about 32 major festivals in America, which is pretty amazing. You know, you can do that in America because it's a very, very large country, of course, but the lineups tend to be the same. You know, the very similar lineups of artists, which is quite, I'd say, problematic. I don't want to see Arcade Fire every night. You know, it's like, can we pick someone else, please? Just not Coldplay. No Coldplay. Yeah. So 5 years ago, actually, was when I met Rashad, and I wrote an essay, having spent quite a bit of time with him. He influenced me into writing an essay about the end of the recording album as the organizing principle. And this was based on his ideas of the future will not fit into the containers of the past. If you think about these things, the vinyl records, you know, this is the first time I was able to release music when with Gang of Four, when Entertainment came out back in 1979. You got a vinyl record. Fortunately for us, Entertainment comes in at 37 minutes, 12 songs, 37 minutes, which, unbeknownst to us, is a perfect running time for a vinyl record. Because if you start getting beyond 15 minutes per side, the quality degrades, you know, the grooves get tighter, the needle can't get down there into the bass response and things like that. But it's really weird to me that technologists never came to artists and said, how much running time do you need? You know, what would work? They just present it. This is something that spins at 33 RPM, and at 40 minutes is your max. And then we got to CDs. Again, technologists create these CDs without sitting down with the creators and saying, do you actually need 70 minutes of time? And it's going to be horribly compressed versus vinyl. No one ever asked. And I think, you know, we still see that now. We've got these new technologies like streaming music services, and the contracts and deals are all done without the musicians at the table. I think that there's a problem there. The musicians need to be represented better. And you know, YouTube is a container of sorts, there's no denying, but when Radiohead used it to broadcast a live performance on New Year's Eve of 2007, that was a performance that included every song from In Rainbows about 2 months prior to its release. I found that quite fascinating because they kind of proved my point that no physical container was necessary in terms of length of a performance or a recording. It didn't have to just be a recording either. It was a film, and it lasted about 90 minutes or so, and it was really intriguing, you know, because it was broadcast live, and then it's been on YouTube ever since. And on this trip around here, last time I looked, 7,425,709 views is quite a large number. Probably more people have seen that film than they could possibly perform to live, you know, or sell a single album. I don't know if they're in the 7.5 million album sales world at the moment. Maybe they are, but I just find it a great irony that Tom York has nothing but disdain for streaming music services. Again, someone I really respect who seems to want to fight this thing that it's like his own invention. Really. It's like, what are we fighting? The internet doesn't care. It's inanimate. It's not going to send you a letter saying sorry. So David Grubbs of Squirrel Bay has written a book, and it's really an interesting book. It's called Records Ruin the Landscape, and this is one of those moments, you know, when I was thinking about today, actually, it's something I've added quickly to my talk because just serendipitously I'd come across a conversation between David Grubbs and my friend Sasha Fred Jones, who's the music critic at the New Yorker magazine. And Sasha had interviewed Grubbs about his new book, and I'd ordered it and brought it with me, so I thought it might be worth popping in once I was thinking about the end of the container. It's a book about how John Cage, the minimalist musician, or composer, I should say, really. And his contemporaries were suspicious of the recording medium when it came to their work. And I found this quite fascinating. I haven't finished the book, so I can't speak at length on it, but the synopsis is basically Cage's disdain for records was legendary. I mean, I'm only bringing this to the table because it's like, it seems we've been arguing about recording or capturing of music or how music should be delivered for a very, very long time. And you know, Grubbs argues that following Cage, new genres in experimental and avant-garde music in the 60s were particularly ill-suited to be represented in the form of a recording. These activities include indeterminate music, long duration minimalism, text scores, happenings, live electronic music, free jazz and free improvisation. How could these proudly evanescent performance practices have been adequately represented on an LP? And in Records Ruin the Landscape, Grubbs is surveying a musical landscape marked by altered listening practices, which kind of, you know, that last phrase, surveys a musical landscape marked by altered listening practices, makes me realize that there's always been this tension around the delivery of music. And music might be described as an art form that uniquely enjoins the work's creators and listeners, and this is me talking now, to defend that work from being co-opted in any form. And that happens a lot, actually. You can have really long arguments long into the night about what's right and wrong about music or a recording. I think it's quite fascinating. People talk to me at length about the recording of entertainment, but that was pretty much recorded live very quickly in a studio because we didn't really want to spend time thinking about it. And we had our own way of recording that matched our lifestyle. But Grubbs' book forces us to consider the stakes of what it means to listen to a recording. It also makes me wonder how Cage would have approached the internet. You know, it's really interesting. We've had these composers out there in the world who didn't get a chance to bring it to the internet. I do wonder what they would have done. Sol LeWitt, some of you in the room may have heard of. He's famous and regarded as a founder of both minimal and conceptual art. In this quote, he was referring to the world he was working in, you know, his world of art and ideas. And once again, I sense that there are analogies again. You know, the punk rock revolution in the 70s, of which I was part of, is an interesting example. With regards to shifts in the social construct, we might say that these days we follow, not lead. The music industry back in the day wasn't paying a lot of attention to punk rock. It thought it might just be an overnight, you know, burnout and gone. But what they failed to see was it was driven by young people in society who couldn't get jobs and they were bored, basically. And along comes some bands that represent that idea of what they're thinking that they would like to do, not what they were doing at the time, and boom, it takes off. And then the record industry is caught, you know, it's sideswiped. And suddenly these bands they have are considered to be boring, and they have to start signing up new bands, the punk rock bands. But some of them didn't get signed to the big labels, and then you saw the rise of independent record labels, which existed somewhat back then, but nowadays independent music in the United States is bigger than all of the majors put together. It's pretty remarkable how that stuck around forever. And what Sol was getting at here is this reaction against whatever is standard. Every generation does it. And again, as I said earlier, these sort of shifts in social constructs precede or even lead to a change in the laws of the land. And what we're seeing now is the way people choose to access music could be said to have begun 2 decades ago. But things really took off with the advent of devices like the iPod, and then about 5 years later with the release of the iPhone. And you know, it's something I try and remind my students, is like, these things have only been around since 2007, like 7 years when the first iPhone came out. But there's this idea that they've always been around forever. And I think we do that. We have short-term memory sometimes that it's as if, well, with my students, they seem to think their parents had iPhones. You know, it's like, no, these are new. And you're growing up in a world of new, if you will, but you don't know it as new. It's just natural to you, which is also quite fascinating. This is one of my favorite quotes from Brian Eno. I don't know if anyone ever read this. It was about 5 years ago, an interview in The Guardian. I think it was Paul Morley, perhaps in The Observer. And Paul's a great writer too. It's quite fascinating to have these two people talking about things. And Paul Morley had asked Brian what he thought about where music's going. And for those of you who don't know, I'll just read out the entire quote that Brian Eno said to Paul. "I think records were just a little bubble through time, and those who made a living from them for a while were very lucky. There's no reason why anyone should have made so much money from selling records, except that everything was right for this period of time." So in that period of time is a very interesting phrase. It was a bit like if you had a source of whale blubber in the 1840s and it could be used as fuel. Before gas came along, if you traded in whale blubber, you were the richest man on earth. And then gas came along and you'd be stuck with your whale blubber. Sorry, mate. History's moving along. Recorded music equals whale blubber today. Eventually, something else will replace it. So there's quite a lot of hyperbole in that quote, but it's good to think about just exactly where it's all going to go, because again, you can't just hang on. Like the recording industry as it stands today, it's in the business of buying copyrights. Now, is that good for the future of music? Because there's a lot of artists now who don't want to sell their copyrights. So where does that leave the recorded music industry? And I think it gives us a chance to build a new recorded music industry. Kurt Vonnegut, "The practice of art isn't to make a living, it's to make your soul grow." The criticism I get when I talk in America and use this slide is like, hands shoot up. It's like, well, of course, he's a famous author, he's already sold loads of books, he can say that. But why can't you say that? Why can't you say things like this in public? It relates to music. Mick Jagger agreed with Brian Eno and said almost the same thing as Brian Eno. It's like, how on earth did we make so much money? Looking at it, without dissonance, it didn't make sense. That, wow. And all you have to do is look at some data and you see like there's a bell curve, and it matches demographics, especially in the United States. At the end of the 70s, there was a hell of a lot of young people, which might have had something to do with the post-World War II families all growing up and everyone buying music because you could buy all sorts of things, washing machines, cars, new houses, everyone having families and just celebrating the end of war, for instance. It pushes out young people into the marketplace who are quite happy to buy interesting rock music. And that might be why they all got rich. But the problem it sort of settled into was musicians come along and think they're all going to get rich when it's going to be an almost impossibility for every musician to get rich. I'm a living example. And so this thing, it's the white elephant in the room. And it's best, I found, for me to bring it up rather than wait for other people to bring it up, because they want to talk about it. And so let me talk about it. So this thing, the $100 bill, is not a thing. It's a tactile thing, but it's just a promise. It doesn't mean anything other than the United States government will guarantee that you can swap it for a good that everyone agrees is worth $100. That's about it. And it's sort of, I want to be careful here because I know we're recording and filming, but it sort of shows. Don't have to be shot in the street tomorrow. Where I want to go with this is, when you talk to musicians about money, I sense there's a weird misunderstanding about that recording contract. It's like we were under no illusion, Gang of Four, when we signed to EMI and to Warner Brothers, we worked with our lawyer to get the best possible deal. So we had a fantastic deal, and still do, with EMI Records, where we got a young lawyer who just come out of law school and was cutting his teeth on recording contracts because he didn't like the old way. He wanted to create something new, and he suggested to us that we should sign to EMI only if they pay to make the record, and then we license that record to them. Think about that. The record company pays to make the record on their dime, and then we licensed the rights to them to exploit it. So now Gang of Four and EMI Records own we all own the master recordings together. And then therefore, when we went to North America for a separate deal with Warner Brothers, we did a producer agreement because we already had the album and said we've produced an album and you now can license it from us. So, you can make this work. But what we were doing was entering into the marketplace and getting a shitload of these things, It's like we knew that whatever we got up front was the only money we're going to get. And sure enough, we never got one more dime in recording royalties from the day we signed in 1979 to both labels. We only went into the black with Warner Brothers Records and EMI. Oh no, Warner Brothers Records we were into the black about 22 years after we signed the contract. And we're still not in the black with EMI Records. We still owe them £18,000. I feel like writing a check and saying, come on, it's been 35 years. Here's a check.
Order.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, please. It's weird. And so sticking with money for a minute. Do you all know about Amanda Palmer? She raised $1.3 million on Kickstarter to own her own album and make her own album, and it was way more money than she was asking for, and all her fans went crazy. Gave her $1.3 million. Now that is using a platform called the internet. Right? Kickstarter, it's online, sits on the platform that we call the web. And then I see her in the news talking about streaming music services are terrible, they're the devil, they're evil. And it's like, look, you can't go and raise $1.3 million over here and then criticize the internet and its other platforms and people who build on it over here. It just doesn't make sense. And that's where I say there's a lot of cognitive dissonance in this. It's like, yes, I want to use this thing, but I don't want to support anything else that might be of benefit to society. Because who are you criticizing at the end of the day, really? If music fans want to access their music via mobile devices and the internet and the mobile platforms, so be it. We have to follow where the audience is going. And I would say by really ragging on the streaming music services, and I'm not saying this, by the way, just because I work at Beats. I want to see a new recorded music industry that Mark Geiger, who's at William Morris Entertainment in Los Angeles, predicts could one day be $100 billion recording industry in about 2 decades. That would make it at least 50% bigger than what the recorded music industry used to be. So there is opportunity, but we've only been at this about 6 years, and so it's very difficult to, Rome wasn't built in a day. It's like we've got to all persevere and get to agreement upon how we're going to make it all make financial sense. And actually, to sort of answer one of Andrew's questions, would be, the old system, the old recording system, was not built for musicians. It was built for the owners of the recording companies, right? Pretty straightforward. Steve Jobs didn't build Apple for you necessarily. He wanted you to buy all his goods and build a really big, profitable company. And that's what record companies do. And so there's always been this kind of mistake, I think, in musicians' minds that they, yes, they provide the product. They are the creators. They're really driving the recording industry. But they missed the bit about, well, you signed a contract that says you only get 12% royalties. And so today, that kind of bites back, I sense there's a little bit of envy there. That young bands, young musicians who don't sign away their copyrights get to keep 100% of everything, minus, say, 3% if you use CD Baby to get all your music in the aggregated services. Moving on, almost done. We'll get to questions. So people say to me, well, what's the answer? How are musicians going to make things happen? And this is an answer. Do you know of this so-called album by Beck? Anyone not? I can explain it very quickly. So Beck has always been, to me, he's always been more of a performance artist than just a pure musician. And for him to put this music out was really interesting to me because it's not an album. You can't play it unless you can read music and play an instrument, because it's just a beautiful package box that inside it is I've forgotten what's inside it. The music, sheet music. Thank you. so many ideas of music. I'm getting tangled up here. It's just sheet music, but and also it wasn't released by a record label. It was released by Max Sweeney's, the book publishing company in San Francisco, which is all quite fascinating. But I sensed that Beck knew exactly what he was doing, because what happened was, musicians bought this box and opened it up and got the sheet music out, and the band or whatever, the collection of friends, would start playing the music from the sheet music, and they would video it, of course, and then they put it on YouTube, and of course these things tend to go off and go viral. If you want to listen to Beck's album, track down a band that performed the whole thing. In my city of Portland, Oregon, where I live, the Portland Cello Project, who are very popular, did a Christmas charity concert for like 3,500 people, and they just played the whole album. And Beck was thrilled, and he was promoting that sort of, this is what I want everyone to do with my music. So that's one way. And then very briefly, another way would be to only make one physical copy of your album. This is the Wu-Tang Clan. And this one, though, is very interesting to me, because they're basically saying that there's just this one physical copy, and it's encased in this beautiful silver box. And it will tour through galleries, museums, and other listening spaces where audiences will pay a fee to listen to it in one go. After that tour is over, the album will be made available for a purchase price in the millions. Reportedly, an offer of $5 million is already on the table. And then RZA, the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, says, the main theme is music being accepted and respected as art and being treated as such. I think there's something a bit wrong with this. It's like we do treat music as art. It is art, because he goes on and says, mass production and content saturation have devalued both our experience of music and our ability to establish its value. There's also this, that he says, the intrinsic value of music has been reduced to zero. Contemporary art is worth millions by virtue of its exclusivity. This album is a piece of contemporary art. So I would say, wait, whoa, hang on. Like, who says the value of music has to be $1 value, or a £1 value, or a euro value? Who says that, right? I don't think people relate to music. Just because this album can be bought for $5 million doesn't make it worth $5 million. You're either going to be moved emotionally by the music within this case or not. And the price is really, it just differs all the time. Your idea of money, each one of you in the room, and my idea of money are very, very different. My success might be your failure. Your failure might be my success. As Paul Krugman points out, The Economist, your spending is my income. It's just bizarre. Like we get into this world of money, and suddenly we've devalued music. It's been reduced to zero. I mean, how can we reduce music to zero? It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to end on hopefully a bit more of an upbeat point. Something I just knocked out on the plane on the way over, just thinking about what is it about value and things like that. I just say that it's worth noting that humans are subconsciously moved by the emotion of music. It provides a link to their ancestry, to their tribes. It stirs not only positive but often negative feelings. It's often linked also to moments in time, steeped in nostalgia and memories. But the big thing is, no other art form is consumed, not a nice word I know, as broadly and passionately as music on a daily basis around the world. And my feelings are we must work hard to ensure that musicians get their rightful rewards for making music, while reminding them that success relies upon a strange mixture of talent, charisma, and timing. Thank you.
insightful. We've got about 5-10 minutes now for questions, so if anyone would like to take some questions, please go ahead. I'm an awful lot more familiar with books, hard copy books versus Kindles.
Yeah.
And there's this famous quote from Stephen Fry that a book is no more challenged or threatened by a Kindle than stairs are by an elevator.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never agreed with the idea that you can resist progress or change.
Progress is a myth, though.
I understand, but if you can't fight alterations in the way people do things, it's gonna happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? You either accept it, you resist it, and if you resist it, you fail. But I've noticed an interesting thing with ebooks. For an example, in the UK, we do 50-50, hard copy books versus ebooks. In France, they're doing 95 versus 5. 95% hard copy books, 5% ebooks.
Right.
And I'm just wondering whether nationally you've observed differences culturally between those people who still buy CDs and those people who are streaming and accessing music on a digital basis, just from a viewpoint of curiosity.
Yeah, well, I mentioned the East. Japan is still a strong CD market, and Korea apparently. So over on, interestingly, where we sort of see the East and countries in the East are sort of more evolved technologically than we are, because they've always got the gadgets. But there has not been a huge drop off of CD sales in many countries over there. And the West, like I said, is pretty saturated, and you could blame this on many things. I was chatting earlier before in the cafeteria, actually with Craig, I think, about the RIAA. Once the RIAA started suing its own customers clients of the record labels it represented, and things went very awry, I think, and it didn't work. In fact, it backfired terribly. And I think young people got into a mode of like, okay, you're painting a picture of us like that, we'll just be that, okay? And it just set everything back, like, I'd say 15, 20 years. It's been really bad. So that's about all I could say about it. I haven't really thought much beyond at the moment. I've just been looking at user behavior in terms of these mobile devices and how they want to access music, and really it's not slowing down at all. I mean, we're not going to go back to a period of people lining up outside record stores in the night on Tuesday to get that Nirvana album on CD.
Simply because we're losing the record stores. Well, that's another factor to take into
I found Tower Records. I never knew where it'd been, but it's actually in Dublin.
I know, we used to have one.
There's one just
we used to have one in the
Dublin.
city centre. We don't know.
Yeah, there's actually the building in HMV in Dublin. So maybe Ireland's going to keep the CD alive. I don't know. Yeah.
Any more? You spoke about artists that, like Tom York, say, who was being against streaming. Would you be able to speculate more on maybe what their reasons that would be? Do you think it's possible because they've enjoyed the rewards of being with record labels, and now that these things have arisen, do you think that's literally the reason why? Is basically greed, and then younger musicians, because they haven't enjoyed that period, they're just more happy to embrace the new technology?
I mean, that's a really great question, but it's a really hard one to answer, because it does seem that the musicians who are complaining the most have already had quite successful careers, Just say, if my career with Gang of Four and Shriekback had been much larger, and I'm not complaining, I've done very well from music, but if I'd been on the levels of millions and millions sold, would I be out here now like this saying we've got to embrace the new technologies? I'd rather hope I would, yes. I'd rather hope I'd still be out here. Now, I'm not suggesting that just because David Byrne or Tom have made a lot of money, they're reaching out and sort of pushing back, as it were. What I'm concerned about is when they wrap it up in this little sort of bag with a bow that says we're doing this on behalf of up-and-coming musicians. Now, I wish they'd been around when I was doing 2 shows a night across America for 26 weeks, sometimes in Texas behind chicken wire whilst cowboys threw bottles at us. no one called me up and said, would you like to stay in a nice hotel tonight? Like, please, please, I'm sick of unloading the gear into Motel 6 every night and sleeping with it in a room. You know, and I'm joking, of course, it's very facile of me, but you know, I don't know of any time in history where the rich musicians have reached down and helped up the, you know, I think they all understand. Actually, you know, let me just put it this way, you know, politically in America, when very poor people vote against their interest, especially when they'll vote for Republicans, when they were just polled, there's been a big poll recently about why they won't accept taxing the rich, which would benefit them, a true trickle-down that would benefit them in a welfare system. And what it turns out is they all expect to win the lottery at some time. And when they have their millions, they don't want it taxed. It's cognitive dissonance. It's like, Jesus. And it's, you know, I'm with John N. Gray on this one, the philosopher. You know, it's just the human condition is cognitive dissonance, I think. And I'm trying to break through that in a sense, personally. I'm confused as to why Tom...
That was my thoughts on it, was basically that it seems that musicians seem to feel they have this right when they make it to make an absolute fortune, rather than just have a career where maybe they earn £30,000 a year like everyone else. It's not like a rite of passage that you just...
Well, I get in trouble when I say this. It's like musicians are not a special subset of society that should be subsidized. Pretty straightforward. Just before you go, Steve, there's somebody at the back with a hand up.
Just about, in a way where it's possible to sort of tie everything with the same brush. It seems to me that something like Spotify, which I, as a performer and a person who releases music, left. So none of my music is now on Spotify.
Right.
The difference with that, I'm still happily on other streaming services. Well, I don't know whether we call them streaming, but things like Amazon, iTunes, etc., which actually pay reasonably for sales. Spotify, it seems to me, has revived the sort of 1920s, 1930s US recording industry model, which is take everything that you can and pay pretty much nothing. So that if you stream through Spotify, we know all the famous statistics of Lady Gaga's 1.3 million for $100, was it, or something? So it's supposedly getting better, but this is a business which takes considerable amounts of money from its subscribers, pays that money out to its shareholders, but doesn't. Okay. So
it pays it to the labels.
Me why I'm wrong.
Well, it pays it to the labels, and because
yes, which is the shareholders, isn't it?
Well, they are public companies. Okay, some of the labels have a piece of Spotify. I think it's Kleiner Perkins in Silicon Valley owns Spotify technically by investing like millions and millions of dollars into it, and I would suspect it's Kleiner Perkins that's pushing them to go to IPO.
But essentially, they've subverted the notion of royalties, which was fought for from the 20s up until the advent of digital. So that PRS and MCPS are now pretty much in collapse.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're going through some serious transitions, and it's really difficult, actually, to speak about who's been paid what and where, right? And what I hate to see are all these articles that drive this sort of argument. Obviously, now I represent Beats. We're the same streaming music service basically as Spotify. We just think we're doing it better. Like we pay major labels and independent labels the same royalty, for instance. I know that Spotify doesn't do that. We don't do free. You can only use it for a week and then you have to sign up or it goes away. And we are looking out for musicians. I mean, we're a company that's really built from the ground up, from Dr. Dre to Jimmy Iovine, Trent Reznor, myself, we're all musicians. And then within the company itself, there's even more musicians. But the contracts with the labels, they own all the catalog, right? So you have young people, particularly young people, but it's quite a broad demographic out there accessing music via these streaming music services. And what I would hope is that we can increase more and more the subscriptions that bring the money in, but we still are paying 70% of all our income to the labels to license that music. And there's the problem. It's called a license. And when you have a recording contract and your music's licensed, the label keeps 50%. And so if those royalties are low in the first place, you also lose 50% because you have a recording contract. Now, switch gears a second. Think about YouTube. You know, billions and billions of views monthly, of which something like 80% are music-based in some kind. And when you see young musicians who've worked this out, they get paid for advertising around how many views your particular area of YouTube gets or streams. You know, I'm losing all the technical terms here. You know, they make a lot of money. YouTube's paying out billions of dollars to copyright holders again. And if those copyright holders are you, and you haven't got a middle person in the way, you get all that money, and it's very substantial. So we've got these weird systems in place, but what we mustn't do is build a new recorded music industry that is mainly streaming services. We mustn't build a new version of the old industry. We've got to somehow create a brand new setup. And that's going to be difficult because you've got so many players in the way who want to hang on to the status quo because they're still making plenty of money. And as I said at the end of my talk there, we've got to work with musicians and labels to get everyone to understand that there's opportunity here, but we have to work together to fix it. We can't work on the fringes. It'll never keep people like yourself happy if you feel that you're not getting paid. But let me just quickly finish on one point. I see this as like a pie. It's like a pie. If you're in iTunes and you're on Amazon and you're in YouTube, I don't see why you shouldn't be in Spotify, because it's just another piece of the pie, and it'll grow. Believe me. You know, people unless well, let me tell you this: if the streaming music services go away, what would your alternative be?
I mean, I agree with you in the pie analogy. Absolutely. If I could extend that, the Amazon, the iTunes pie is filled with fruit. The Spotify pie has got nothing in it.
I know, but they've only been around for 5 years.
So maybe they'll improve, but right now, what I'm saying is I agree with you. It's just that some seem a little bit more wolfish than others.
I agree. No, but don't think for 1 minute. You know, this is where, like, you know, Tom York had tweeted up not so long ago about Daniel X selling his shares in the company. He has a right to do that. He took great risk to go out and raise money and build out this giant technical service system around the globe, right? And if he's not getting paid, he wants to sell some stock to get paid. I think that's his right. And I don't remember a time when people were looking at Mo Austin back in the 70s, who was the head of Warner Brothers. I don't think they were calling him up going, "Are you selling shares? Are you selling shares in this company?" Because he has a right to. You know, it's weird. It goes back to my $100 bill analogy. We all have a different relationship with money, and money is a very emotional topic. And I'm trying to work around that to say we can all work together and make this thing much better. But I would say get back into Spotify, and in America get into Beats, aggregate through all the aggregators, and just see where it's coming from, because my royalties are certainly increasing globally through streaming music services. And I know that iTunes is getting concerned that they're selling less music now, and no one's using their iRadio thing very much, so that might shrink and the streaming services take over. I think I did read something last week that Spotify is really in head-to-head competition with iTunes over here, so it might be worth reconsidering. Yeah.
I'm this is perhaps intrusive, but I'm fascinated by the degree of conflict that was in your own head, because you talk with you seem to have adopted two very clear positions. There's a sort of determinist look at the ad-funded mega industry model that you know your analysis of that and of the role of digital services within that is very clear. Mm-hmm. But then you talk about with equal clarity about the friction of money and the role of music as a sort of cultural experience and as a human being. And certainly for me, I find that because I've obviously done a lot of the similar kind of analysis,
Right.
and I find that coming to a similar position to you as an observer, my reaction is to want to set fire to a lot of that. Not the mechanism, because I pulled my music out of Spotify as well.
Yeah.
Not over their funding model, because I'd quite happily be on Spotify and not be paid at all, just because I like people listening to my stuff, but because just from a fair trade argument, they didn't strike me as a company whose setup and opacity was in keeping with how and why I made music.
Mm.
And there seems to be that tension at the heart of your analysis, that as a because I think it's the clarity in the two of them that seem to me that you seem to have embraced a dissonance that I couldn't get past, and I'm fascinated by that.
Mm. Yeah, I think you make a good point, and you know, was it Alex Harvey who said, paradise was never meant to be easy. And it's like what you just said there is interesting, because you're coming at it as a musician and a creator, right? That would like to have your music heard wherever it can possibly be heard. You know, I mean, put it this way: if you didn't have a record contract and you could have got into the old jukebox system in a pub, right? You got your 45 in there, and everyone was playing it, but you never got paid because you weren't in the system. You just happened to have found, hey, there's an empty slot, can I put my 45 in there? You'd be very happy. And I think that, yes, I'm walking a fine line. I know that, and I'm just like, it's this kind of debate though that I want to create. You know, it's this challenge to my ideas and points that are really important. No, because it'll help me go away and think more about it and get that book written that I want to write, where we can actually all, you know, I can sell one to every musician on the planet and see ya. That's not going to happen. But each musician actually as well has a personal point of view, right? And it's like every music fan in a sense, isn't it? It's like they will fight the end of the day for their favourite band, and you just say, I just don't like that band, and they don't know why, and they get really angry, but I don't get angry at them for liking the band. It's like you can't be an atheist unless you understand that people believe in God. You have to accept that people believe in God before you can be an atheist, otherwise you've got nothing to be an atheist about. And so there's all this stuff out there that's really complicated, and I'm just trying to change the tone of the conversation more than anything. So I'm very happy that you said that I'm managing my own dissonance. That's nice to hear, but don't believe it. We're not there yet. I still lie awake at night a lot.
Well, it seems like that tension drives a lot of your writing. I think that's why I'm drawn to it. I found your perspective on a lot of these things. It always stops slightly short of where I would go. It's like, I'm totally with you up to there. Well, but what do we do?
Well, perhaps if I wasn't working for Beats now, I'd be right there with you with the petrol cans torching me for a minute. No, I don't want to. I don't want to end on a silly note. I think it's a serious thing. It's very serious, and I think Andrew and I will probably get further into it now.
Thanks, Darren. It's a really interesting introduction.